Welcome in to a live Illini cast brought to you by Illini Cast in the Armchair Illini Network. And I am blessed to be with Mike Carpenter, former compadre at Stevie J Broadcasting, with the Tay and Carp show and the Tay and J show back in the day. And it's just crazy that we get nice things to talk about now in in Illini sports, and we're going to be talking about it all: Illini football, Illini basketball, and his new book, which we will get to as well. So, Carp, how are you doing? How are things in life with you?
They're going great. It's great to see you, talk to you again. And you mentioned the 93.5 days, which we had so much fun despite the lack of on-field and on-court success. I mean, we made do the best we possibly could. And we put on some good radio, and there is something cathartic about when things aren't good. But when they are good, it's just the word I go back to a lot, and I don't think it's hyperbolic, is joy. And the reason I use that word joy is because individually, you're enjoying it, I'm enjoying it. But we know enough people that we get to share it with them. And it's really just been the conversation, the talk of this community since the season began. And it's contagious. I mean, it is on the top of everybody I know, on top of everybody's mind. And I'm swept up in it. This is just a really good time to be an Illini fan, and the best I've felt about the revenue sports, and I'll throw women's basketball in there, the athletic department as a whole, probably in my Illini fandom that I can remember.
I mean, it is truly remarkable because both of us were pretty honest on Twitter back in the day and on the radio, and everyone called us like negative Neds and all of that back in the day when things weren't going well. I mean, it is so nice to not have to be a cold blanket anymore. It is so nice to actually enjoy it with the Illini fans and not have to be a part of Twitter drama anymore. It's just nice that we can all come together and truly enjoy what Brett Bielema, Josh Whitman, and Brad Underwood and the players are able to accomplish so far in the last few years.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to nitpick instead of have existential dread about both programs. Now, you mentioned that, though, and I have made a couple of miscalculations in the last calendar year. So I'll give you two of them real quick. Back in November, Illinois was trailing Valparaiso at halftime. Roger Powell Jr.'s Valparaiso, a very bad team. And I tweeted something to the effect of rinse and repeat. You know, it's the same old. We brought back the same team with a few new pieces. And is this all there is with the Brad Underwood program? Well, I feel great about it. I was very, very wrong and had one of the best times as an Illini fan watching that. And even back in April, Austin, I wrote this Substack about Brett Bielema and the Illini football program, kind of wondering, have we plateaued? Are we kind of perpetually 5, 6, maybe 7 wins? And at what point does he miss his window to build this thing? I am so glad to have been so wrong on both of those counts, where it seems like both of these guys were the times I either wrote or tweeted those things were right before they went on furious runs that I think in both cases might have been good enough to solidify, hey, this is the new floor for both Illinois basketball and football.
When you look at Josh Whitman and what he has been able to accomplish, have you ever seen Illini athletics at this fever pitch where even some non-revenue sports like baseball and women's basketball are enjoying the success? You stole Georgia's track and field coach as well. I mean, it feels like Josh Whitman has put together the um, deepest run of Illini programs I've ever seen. But I know you study this a little bit more than I have. But where have you seen Josh Whitman in this particular run of just collective of sports together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was born in 86, so I was not at all conscious or even alive for a good chunk of the 80s belonged to the Illini. And I believe that was Neil Stoner was the AD. Things were cooking on both sides of Kirby Avenue. You know, Ron Gunther gets in there, and there were a couple of seasons perhaps, and I'll go back to 2001. Bill Self's first year and into his second year coincided with the Sugar Bowl run. And it felt like, whoa, I mean, now we're cooking, and it seems like Ron Turner and Bill Self are the guys. One of those was the case. One of those was definitely not the case. And it's been bits and starts at best, but rarely have the stars aligned. And as you mentioned, not just with the revenue sports, but with the entire athletic program. And what I appreciate about him, I think this trickles down to Underwood and and Bielema as well. I think the three of them, and throw Sean Green in there if you want, there is a flexibility and adaptability with the way that they do their jobs. And the fact that Josh Whitman has overseen this athletic program as the NIL era has really kicked underway, and there's all these question marks as how do you proceed if you're a Power 5, now Power 4 program. And he seems to be hitting all the right buttons with that and be very forward thinking, which is what you need. So, no, that's a long winded way of saying this is completely different from the reality I grew up in, which, as Stephen Bardo coined on T&J back in 2013 to 14, it felt like we were the University of East Central Illinois. We felt small time in a way. You could just sense it. I hated it, and it's just so refreshing to think that we're kind of a brand now, and in many ways a growing brand that has a little bit of national pop. That's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, media literacy hasn't been Illini fans' strong points in the past, to be completely honest, because it's like, well, why isn't 670 The Score talked about the Illini? Why isn't 101 ESPN in St. Louis talked about the Illini? Where's the Illini at on these national radio shows talking about college sports? We are starting to see some national relevance once again for the Illini. I was listening to the College Football Inquirer podcast on Yahoo Sports and the Cover 3 podcast with Illini fan Tom Fornelli, and Illinois takes a prominent stage on those conversations. And what was so refreshing about last Friday night was that the cane wasn't around the Illini's neck and we weren't ripped off the stage after the national relevance. And tomatoes weren't being thrown Illini's way after an embarrassing loss. And I think this is a true new chapter of Illini sports where the relevancy will remain, and it's not going to just be a once every couple years for a week Illinois gets on the stage. And it feels like the tide has turned in that regard.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you mentioned Friday, you don't get the cane like whipping you right off stage, and we are so used to that feeling, right? And that's why I think I was kind of at a loss for words. We did 30 minutes. We did the second half podcast, and then we did about 30 minutes post game, just straight into it. And I was kind of at a loss for words, and then just my mind couldn't wrap itself around the fact that we actually did it, and it was more than just winning a game in Nebraska. It felt like kind of a signature moment that said, okay, there were 4+ million people watching that game. Anyone that's a college football fan was watching that game on a Friday night, and they were entertained the entire way through and came away thinking that Illinois team's pretty damn good. That is all I need. So here's the good news, Austin. To me, the expectations that I would have for Illinois football in order for me to be a happy fan don't necessarily change. We have often said, and I still agree with it, 7, 8 wins. We're happy as clams. That's all we need. And I still stand by that. And I would love to do an about face in 5 or 6 years when Brett Bielema is stagnating at 8-4 records, and we're like, oh God, why can't he go 11-1? Wouldn't that be great? And maybe that's what'll happen. But basketball also has that historical context where you can't expect the occasional deep run. So yeah, I think there is something about that where we feel it around us, but it's cool to know that others are paying attention. And for much of our sports going fandom with Illinois football and for about a decade of basketball, that wasn't the case. So that's a nice place to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said, let's try to be Wisconsin, let's try to be Iowa, let's try to be these Big Ten West programs that have had success. You're not going to be Ohio State, and now you're not going to be Oregon now that they're in the Big Ten. But being in that first or second spot of Tier 2 in the Big Ten, that's kind of the sweet spot for Illinois, I feel like, in the future because of recruiting and, more importantly, not being left behind whenever the powers that be want to break up college sports once again. And Illinois can be relevant. Illinois can say, you know what, we are a national program in basketball. We have a top 10 NIL situation in basketball. And now football is carrying its weight, which is firmly awesome with the sellout that they had against Kansas. And it just feels like Illinois is in a place where they can't just be left behind, which is all I've ever asked whenever these rumblings happen when the Big Ten was going to expand. And are you going to be the Washington State or are you going to be the Oregon in this situation? And Illinois is closer to being the Oregon than the Washington State.
Yeah, and I think there was a legitimate concern with football, especially of whether or not we will ever do the English Premier League thing of relegation. I don't know. But it's not outside the realm of possibility that in 5-10 years you get to a point where if you aren't holding up your end, go to the MAC or whatever. Like
Yeah.
go to the whatever that lower tier would be. And I have joked, and I think I mean this. I don't know. I'd rather be a winning MAC team than a losing Big Ten team. But then I thought about it and said, wait a second. No, like I'm not going to give up on Illinois football yet. Like there's just this part of me and probably part of you and most Illini fans, even when we're at our lowest with it, even when I've been like, I'm not setting foot in that stadium, I've never completely abandoned the idea that they can figure it out, right? And that's fool me once, shame on me, whatever that saying is. But at the same time, we're seeing that it really doesn't take all that much. I mean, really, it doesn't take all that much to be relevant in college football because the thin line that separates the good programs from the bad is usually the bad programs just do more stupid things. And if you can ever just get above water and stop doing as many stupid things as the opponents, which is kind of what Brett Bielema's bread and butter is, then you will find your way to 7 or 8 wins a year, even in this Big Ten, because as good as you mentioned the top guys are, Oregon, Ohio State, they aren't going anywhere. I don't need to be them. I don't need to be in the same breath as them. But I do want to be in the same breath as Iowa. I do want to be in the same breath as, I think, historically Wisconsin, that we'll kind of see what Luke Fickell's doing up there. I'm not sure.
That's crazy to me that Luke Fickell might be having Wisconsin take a step back, which is mind-blowing for me because I thought he was the better coach hire than Matt Rule at Nebraska.
Me too. I certainly thought that. And then Matt Rule seems to be, I think he'll do like Bo Pelini levels of success without all the anger issues, I guess. I mean, like, I do think, though, there is an opportunity, and this is what was so frustrating about the decade that we were at 93.5, is that we had all these windows of opportunity in the Big Ten West. And as long as we didn't just stink, we were going to win some games, but we couldn't get out of our own way. And I think that's the first thing a program has to do. Stop getting in your own way. And they're doing that this year and some. And what's even more exciting, Austin, is that they're getting out of their own way. But then on top of that, I feel like each and every quarter that I see this football team play, they're getting better. I think there's still room to grow. I don't think we've just kind of randomly found our way to a 4-0 record. I think that we have kind of grown along the way. And by the fourth quarter, by overtime of Nebraska, that was not the same team we saw against Kansas. It was a much better team. So it's and that's what excites me for these last 8 games here. But more than that, makes me feel like, okay, maybe we've gotten over that proverbial hump as a program. And Brett Bielema, now that he's firmly entrenched with his guys and his system, can kind of keep things rolling even as you lose a couple stars to the NFL draft each year, which is going to happen. But last year, we just couldn't replace them quite as well. If we can do that going forward, I think that we're probably in good shape.
I tweeted out that Luke Altmaier's performance against Nebraska was the most poised I've ever seen of an Illini quarterback. And I look at what he's done. 2 top 25 wins, 10 touchdowns in those games, and navigated some tough situations of coming back to take the lead and ultimately winning. I was having a conversation with some of my friends via group text and thinking, where does Luke Altmaier rank on quarterbacks all time of the Illini? And I think he is firmly in the top 6 to 7 at this point. And if he keeps this up, gets Illinois to 8 or 9 victories in this tough schedule in this new Big Ten, there's a chance that he can be maybe number 2 to Tony Eason. It's crazy to think about, but I've never seen a quarterback be able to maneuver those 2 games, at least in a long time. And you're talking Juice Williams, Nate Scheelhaus, and Brandon Peters and Tommy DeVito. It's pretty incredible what Luke Altmaier has been able to do thus far 4 games into the season, especially after his disappointing last season.
I shouldn't have made that sound. You said Brandon Peters. I said, oh, I shouldn't have done that. He was fine. Like, he was also the victim of probably not a great team around him. But what he lacked was an it factor. And that was our question with Luke. Does he have an it factor? And I'm watching the game against Nebraska, and I'm seeing him get ticked off. I'm seeing him on the sideline fuming after Hank Beatty fumbles it, as we all were wherever we were watching it. Hank, fall down. And to see the quarterback be engaged like that when our major concern was, is he just kind of Brandon Peters 2.0, like a little too nice, a little too standoffish? That doesn't appear to be the case. You mentioned poise. Kirk Hittner in 2001 had about 3 or 4 of those performances. One of my favorites of his was they were at Purdue, and he threw 3 or 4 picks in the first half. And I think Illinois was trailing 17-3 or something like that. And then I think we ended up winning like 38-17. Like he just came out in the second half and said, all right, enough of that. But he was a bit more Brett Favre in that he was kind of a gunslinger and just kind of went out there whipping it around to his NFL wide receivers. Luke Altmaier, to me, there's a very seasoned aspect to his game. And if you keep him clean, if you just keep him upright, he's going to find somebody and he's going to deliver a catchable ball. The exceptions, oddly enough, against Nebraska were 2 screen passes, one which Josh McCray remarkably caught. I guess they weren't screens, but just out in the flat. And one which was just errant. Those were the 2 worst throws of the night, the closest ones. But anything intermediate or long, he's hitting. And I knew from the 3rd and 1 call on the first drive to find Pat Bryant for 25, 30 yards down the sideline, I was like, oh, okay, this is a quarterback. And the fact that Lunny has confidence in him, as he should, I think should make us a little bit more bullish going forward as well.
Looking at this wide receiver group of Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant and Malik Elzy to a lesser extent, these wide receivers are something that Illinois hasn't seen in quite a while. And Barry Lunny Jr.'s offense has just been a godsend, especially the way he scripted out Nebraska. What have been your thoughts on Barry Lunny's offense thus far this year and how he's improved from last year?
The lowest point was Nebraska at home last year. So to see the flip that happened in less than a calendar year when you played them again kind of tells the tale about how Barry Lunny has figured things out. I do think in his defense early last year, the offensive line was so bad that you could have had Andy Kolonicki or whatever the Penn State guy's name is. I think I got it right. But you could have had him back there and he wouldn't have had a whole lot of points scored by his offense either. So to me, the most encouraging thing about Lunny, and there are some frustrations, as we saw in the first, I thought, 3 quarters of the Kansas game. He's great at scripting. He made a move against Nebraska that I think bodes well going forward, which is the old adage of set up the run by passing it. Use the pass to set up the run, which sometimes as a novice football fan, I wonder, is that something you can actually do? But he proved that you could. And this run pass option, which is what killed us when we played UTSA back in 2021, that has become the bread and butter. So now that he's in year 3, after a first down and then up second year, I've been on the whole impressed with him and also appreciate that when push has come to shove, and it took almost a little bit too long against Kansas, but when push comes to shove, he's like, okay, screw it. We're airing it out. We're going to do it because he knows that he can. So if he can, just like he did against Nebraska, continue to fine tune that, I think that you have an offense that I have no problems thinking they're going to get 27, 28 points a game, which going into the season, I thought you would need in order to get to a bowl game with this defense. But now that the defense isn't half bad and actually might be good, 27, 28 points a game, you're talking like 9 wins. So that's just what this all does, the balance between those 2 units and the fact the offense is living up to what we hoped they would. And now the defense is a lot better than I thought we assumed they would be.
Did we all panic too much about Aaron Henry last year, or do you think that it was still justified with him being new? Or what are your thoughts on Aaron Henry's development as well, with the freak out that I even had last year about what this defense looked like?
I thought he should have been fired because to me, if the precedent was set with Tony Peterson after year 1, why would it not be the case when you took a top 5 national defense and they went all the way to the gutter and cost you a bowl game? Now, he kept him. And at first I wondered, is that just loyalty? What is it? Now, Aaron Henry, I don't know if he's a great coordinator, but I do know that this year he is much improved and I think objectively doing a very good job with this defense. While there are returning pieces, this collection of 11 guys that are out there haven't had a whole lot of snaps together. So I think the kind of like synergistic way that you see them start to play against Nebraska, where the D-line, or let's say the front 5, if you include the outside linebackers, let's say the front 5 and the back 5, and then you got Dylan Rosiak in the middle, I feel pretty good about that. So I think it's a credit to Aaron Henry, perseverance, learning on the job, which kind of made me roll my eyes last year when they would say those things. Well, I learned on the job. You're a Big Ten defensive coordinator. I don't want you to learn on the job. I want you to do it. But we're here, which speaks to his growth, which speaks to Brett Bielema and any adjustments he made at the top. And I think maybe the position coaches too. I don't know how much Finellis hurt you as your secondary coach last year, but that unit absolutely killed you. I think the inexperience had more to do with it, but they are just above and beyond what they were. And yeah, to me, this is like a top half of the Big Ten defense, which that'll do. Like, that'll play and get you a lot of wins if you're a top 9 Big Ten defense. I don't know what they are statistically now. I would assume like 5 or 6, maybe. I'd have to look it up, but they look the part. And I do think it'll stick because I think there's legitimate talent, especially when you have your 11 best out there.
Kirkland from Armchair Illini coming in. Predictions for Illinois football if they knock off Penn State. Great group of guys. Congrats, Carp. Yes, congrats on the book. We will get to that at the very end of this interview. But answer that question while I go grab my power cord. My laptop battery is going low.
I can cover this.
Talking, Carp.
Yeah, just like back in the days at 93.5 when Lon would have to go to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
So, okay. If we beat Penn State, I think then you're looking at 10-2, which might sound outlandish, but if you think about that, that still factors in 2 more losses, one of which we could assume would be Oregon just because of the tough nature of that game, and then either Michigan at home or Rutgers on the road. The encouraging thing to me, Kirkland, about that, and also appreciate it, Kirkland, is when you look at the back half of the schedule, boy, oh boy, the Michigan States, the Minnesotas, and the Northwesterns of the world, they look bad. And that might change, and it could be like 2 years ago where a bad Michigan State team came in here and they just kind of controlled that game in just very befuddling fashion. Or it could be that in year 4, Brett Bielema, now with more depth and just more experience under his wings in the Big Ten, he's not going to allow that to happen. So if you beat Penn State, I'm not going to say 12-0. I'm not going to say 11-1. But I think 10-2 is right there. And what that means is you might be hosting a college football playoff game in Champaign in mid-December, which would be absolutely bananas.
That sentence, like,
I know.
It sounds like fiction. It sounds like something that's like, oh, you played college football 25 too long, too many hours. And it's a reality. I mean, with the way the 12-team playoff is, with the conference that Illinois is in the Big Ten and not the one bid Big 12 or the one bid possibly ACC, you have a legitimate shot of making a college football playoff just by being 4th place in the conference. And I think if we're talking Brett Bielema's Wisconsin-era teams, and if you go back, I think every one of his successful teams would have made the college football playoff no matter what their record was in the top 4. They would have made it. I mean, that's the kind of program that Brett Bielema is building here in Illinois, and it's just shocking that it's happened this way, but all credit to Brett, all credit to Barry Lunny, and all credit to Aaron Henry and this coaching staff for what they built.
And I want to follow that up with if they lose Saturday, which, while I think the Vegas spread is pretty ridiculous.
Oh, I'm betting Illinois if I'm still in the state of Indiana on Friday.
It's smart.
Yeah.
But I still, just kind of like the Nebraska game, and this is not that I'm doubting them, but it's a tall task. It's like, to me, the idea of playing with house money, I think that actually does apply here because, of course, when the game starts, and if we're close in the 4th quarter, I'm going to want to win it, and I'm going to be disappointed if we lose. I don't know what it would take for me to be pissed. I mean, it may be a bad officiating call or something, but I don't think if it's a close game, I would have anything to be angry at the team about. It would reiterate to me that they're probably just playing good, like they're just a good football team. And to me, what that would tell you is even with the loss to Penn State, I think you're looking at a realistic floor if you look as good as you did against Nebraska of 8-4, which would still be factoring in a loss that you probably would not want. I mean, let's play it scratch, Austin. If we just go with odds, right, from here to the end of the season, you lose to Penn State. Let's say Michigan is a 2.5 point favorite. I mean, I don't know, 3.5 point favorite. I can't imagine it being much more. And maybe by that point, Illinois will be the favorite. But let's just say you lose to Michigan, you lose to Penn State, you lose to Oregon, and I'll throw in at Rutgers. 8-4. It's right there. And I also think that this team, even though they got the win against Nebraska on the road, Brett Bielema's teams historically play well on the road. And I think they got one more in them. And a game like Oregon, where I used to say, yeah, right. I don't know. I'm going to watch it and think, what the heck? So that's all that is to say. Saturday, I'm super pumped. If you don't win, though, like a 9-win season's still on the table. A 10, I mean, I guess a 10-win would be, though you'd almost have to play perfect ball from here on out. But if you told me before the season 9-3, 8-4, I said 7-5, I'd be ecstatic. And I think this team, if they stay healthy, will blow past that.
Yeah, I always thought that the predictions by some of the experts that were like, oh, a 3-win Illinois team, a 4-win Illinois team, I always thought that was like very weird because you have return all four pillars of what brings a college football team successful. You return the quarterback, you return the OC, you return the defensive coordinator, and you return the head coach. And whenever you have college football in such a chaotic situation where so many guys are jumping ship to different teams and everything, to return all four pillars, I mean, I think that was worth a bowl game just right there, in my opinion, before the season began. And now, my only thing is just don't let the cane rip you off the stage now. That's the big thing. Like, don't get embarrassed by any of these teams, regardless if it's Oregon, regardless if it's Michigan or Penn State. Just be competitive in those games. Lose by 10 or so. That's fine. Just don't get blown out and showcase, well, that's old Illinois again. That's the big time thing that Brett and Illinois need to battle this rest of the season.
To me, wouldn't it surprise you, though, like if we did get completely blitzed?
Oh, absolutely it would.
It would surprise me, and that's not to say that the game can't get away from you late and there's a pick six or something. Oh, God, the whiteout sellout crowd got to you. They got pressure on Luke. He just lofted one up there, and they take it back. Oh, now Penn State's up 17, and that's how the game's going to end. Well, I guess the question would be, when people wake up Sunday, your average college football fan, are they going to wake up thinking Illinois sucks? Like, to me, regardless of what the final score may be, I would be surprised if we wake up Sunday thinking we were completely outclassed. That would be the shock to me. So the only way I could wake up disappointed, Austin, is if we just don't look the part of a year 4 team under a guy that's had success in the Big Ten before. If we were to revert to Lovie Smith-esque ball, or the very few instances in Brett Bielema's tenure, like Nebraska at home last year, or at Purdue, or at Virginia his first year, then I would be totally bummed. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a lot like if Illinois lost by like 15 or so points. I feel like Illinois' reputation would look a lot like what Oklahoma's is after losing to Tennessee, where it's like, oh, they're just not ready for the primetime players, but they are right there in contention for a really solid bowl game outside of the playoff, and we'll see what Brett Venables and Brett Bielema are able to do the next year. I mean, that very well could be a bowl game this year, Oklahoma and Illinois kind of thing. Quickly, last football question. Alexander from Armchair Illini says, should Illinois football still cancel the Mizzou series that starts in 2026 and at least goes until 2035? I just looked this up with a Mizzou fan, friend of mine, about what this series is going to look like. So should we cancel that series, or should we keep pushing forward and try to get that gorilla off of our back and finally beat Mizzou?
Alexander, it's funny the difference a week makes, as I'm out at a family thing Saturday, basking in the glow, 4-0 Illini, checking my score app. It was on SEC Network, so we didn't watch it out there, but oh my God, Missouri's going to overtime with Vanderbilt. Bring on Missouri, bring on Missouri. I still don't have a whole lot of pull to that game. Whether it's recency bias and the fact that the games I went to in St. Louis never worked out, and that's 2002, 2003, 07, 08, 09, 10, right? It just didn't work. I think, you didn't win a single one of them. So you can go back before that because it's a 7-17 or a record. Yeah, our record against them is 7-17. So even before that, it wasn't going good. And the one team you lost to in the regular season, the Rose Bowl year in 1983, Missouri, in the first game of the year. I don't think it's worth. It doesn't move me as an Illini fan. So then the question becomes, okay, if we have a down year, let's say Bielema's cooking, and we have a down year one of those years, where we would normally be a 6-6 team that just overcomes it because of the strength of your basement is higher than it used to be. And the difference is you had to play Missouri in the non-conference. I still don't like it. No. And the basketball series is what it is. And they would say, well, we're a football school, so why don't you kind of match us with that? Why don't we go tit for tat in that regard? No, it doesn't move me. And things can change, and I don't know, Drinkwitz might end up being a bit of a bust, and maybe the NIL we start matching all the money they're throwing around. But at the moment, if you tell me, hey, we got out of that series, I don't mind it. And also, I don't like this notion that you're playing scared. No, your goal is to win games. If the story came out that Illinois bought out of that series, the most that I'm going to feel from that is like one or two people at the bragging rights game saying, yeah, well, you guys bought. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm here to watch basketball. Like, it would be forgotten about. It's not, to me, it's not that big of a deal. But is that going to happen? No. They're going to play the games because we saw the crap that I think, was it Wake Forest got after canceling their Ole Miss series?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Now, granted, that was in the news cycle for all of 2 hours. And their fans will forget about it. I don't see the ultimate benefit. If you win, I see the benefit. I just don't know, even in 2 years, what your likelihood is of that, because they are paying the kind of money that college football juggernauts do for their players. That is what they're investing their program in.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if J.B. Pritzker or whoever the governor is signs a bill that says, hey, high school seniors, if you pick an Illinois State school, then you're eligible to get NIL dollars your senior year of high school, then maybe it'll be more equal in terms of getting some of that talent in the Metro East and St. Louis area and Chicago, and then it's a true dogfight of two Midwest schools battling out. But right now, Illinois really doesn't have anything to prove with Mizzou. It's not like they're in our conference. It's not like they're going to ever join our conference. They're in the SEC. They're more focused in on what Ole Miss is doing, and Illinois is more focused in on what Iowa is doing. I've kind of changed my tune on this. I was very pro keep the series, but the fact is only 101 ESPN and the St. Louis Dispatch would write disparaging articles about that, and then it'll be done in a few weeks, and they'll still give Illinois about this much in the paper if they make a bowl game compared to the rest of the paper for Eli Drinkowitz's amazing heroism of taking Mizzou to the next level as a program, and there are only 7 wins. Like that's really what you're fighting for, is just 2 media outlets to keep that series. And so I'm all in favor of switching that out for Illinois State or whoever the heck it would be. Play the FCS schools. That's what Alabama has always done, and that's what Georgia has always done. And I think Illinois needs to join that crew. There's no point in building this ACC, Big 12, or SEC schedule alongside your tough Big 10 already.
Yeah, stop it. Yeah, and you mentioned that. I mean, Michigan and Ohio State and Alabama and you name it, they don't leave home until October most of the time. And if it is, it's the last week of September. Why?
Ohio State has played Marshall, Akron, and Toledo, I think, like something crazy like that.
Yeah. Do you think their fans care? No, because they're 3-0, well on track to yet another great season. Now, I understand. Listen, the Kansas game and the vibe around the stadium was special. It was. And it paid off beautifully. I mean, that was the game that I think was just so essential for Brett Bielema and also for just the fans' perception of his program. And he got it. If he hadn't gotten it, it's a very different tune. And I do think that people wouldn't have such a short memory about, wait a second, why do we have Missouri coming up here? I know Duke is coming up as well. I don't know how well that program is doing at the moment. I think they beat Northwestern, but they don't scare me necessarily. But again,
Manny Diaz is their head coach, and I have no faith that he's going to stick around if he's successful, or he's going to flame out and he'll get fired in 2 years.
Yeah, and people could say, well, and someone rightfully, after Bowling Green took Penn State to the wire a few weeks ago, said, now, Carp, would you rather be playing Bowling Green? Because I explicitly said, instead of Kansas, buy it out, bring in Bowling Green. I don't care. And then, well, yeah, that would have been a bad loss. Same like Northern at Notre Dame. But those are still aberrations. Those are rare. I just feel like get the wins before you get a 9-game juggernaut. And who knows, somewhere down the road, Austin, this might be taken care of for us. And these conferences might just say, wait. The money is in an all-conference season. Or they just move to 10 games first. And then we are forced to buy out of those other ones. And I would hope the first ones we buy out of would be the Missouris of the world. You just don't need it. And like you said, okay, they write about you down into the St. Louis Dispatch. Who cares? Whatever. Bernie Micklitz writes a column. It is forgotten about in a week because they're a Cardinals town. And they don't care about Illinois football. And that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it takes Illinois to get an Elite Eight to get it Brad Underwood on the air at 101 ESPN. That's just wild to me. But I mean, again, this could all be taken care of by itself if the Big Ten and SEC ever decide to combine and do their own thing, and you add Florida State and Clemson, then maybe you're forced to play Mizzou because that's your non-divisional foe once they build it out like the NFL. I mean, that's pretty much the way that this is going to go in the future, and it's just in Illinois' favor to be a part of that in the future. But let's switch to basketball, Carp. This has been an unbelievable year. Brad Underwood got that monkey off of his back, moving to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Terrence Shannon, first-round pick. But then you look at this season where you have a five-star player in Will Riley. You have Kasparis Yanukovych. That last name.
Kuchionis.
There we go.
Something like that.
And you have him. You have Thomas Lopavicic, got that one down. And Ben Hummerkaus, the transfer. You still have Ty Rogers. You still have Trey Gibbs-Lahorn. This depth is incredible on this team, at least on paper. So what is your starting lineup for this team starting out? Because I've never seen a situation where you ask 20 people what your starting lineup is for Illinois basketball and you get 20 different answers.
There are three for sures. It's Colin Boswell, Kasparis Kuchionis, and Ben Hummerkaus. You're 1, 2, and 4, right? That's a given, I feel like. I don't think Will Riley's going to start. I think he's like a 22-minute-a-game guy off the bench. I think that your starting three will be Ty Rogers in a platoon sort of thing with Trey White. And I think ultimately Trey White might get a few more minutes than Ty. The five is interesting to me because I don't know when Ivisic got on campus. I don't know if that lack of summer workouts is going to cost him.
International man of mystery right there.
That's right. And it sounds like Morez is ready to go. I mean, he's an athlete. I know he gives up a little bit of size at the 5 spot, but how many Zach Edey's are you facing this year? You know, like cross that bridge when you get there. I think that Morez Johnson may start at the 5. But that's a really good question. I mean, to me, the 3 and the 5 are the question marks. And I think your best five, which might be more important, still includes Boswell, KJ, and Ben Hummerkaus, Will Riley, and then I think Morez. Now the question is, can you win big games with 2 freshmen out there? I don't know, but this is such a fun collection of toys that, like, while there will be moments in November and December, and I need to remind myself of this, when there is a game where they lose by 13 and they look out of sorts offensively, and it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It'll be fine. I think they're going to contend for a Big Ten title. I just don't see anyone in the Big Ten that scares me to where I think, oh, well, Brad Underwood won't be able to figure this out in time. And then you look at the schedule that got released. I could not have asked for more breaks on a conference schedule. You have one West Coast road trip early in January. You're done with it after that. Turns out these Pac-10 teams or Pac-12 that came over, other than UCLA, don't really scare you anyway. And then your double plays, okay, Michigan State, but where are they going to be this year? Wisconsin, love it. Love playing them twice. And then Northwestern. You could do worse. So I just like the way the schedule shook out. I love these tough non-conference games he's scheduled. And just feel like by mid-January, this thing will be cooking.
Yeah, I love the Duke game being in February, and I liked how the Big Ten kind of was like, hey, don't worry, we're not going to schedule like Purdue and Michigan State right by that. We're going to schedule Iowa around that and Wisconsin, so it's not so daunting with that Duke game going to Madison Square Garden. I just feel like this team is set up for this new Big Ten, where there's so many different ways that these different coaches are going to want to play, whether it's Eric Musselman, whether it's Matt Painter, whether it be Greg Gard. I mean, the list goes on about the different playing styles of these different Big Ten coaches. And Brad Underwood can just go to that toy chest, like you mentioned, and be like, oh, you're playing a physical game? Let me put a Ivisic at the 5. Oh, you're going to play like a run and gun athletic game? All right, Morez Johnson, you go at the 5. You have a guard that has a lot of scoring ability. Ty Rogers, you're going to start this 2 here. Oh, we need offensive firepower. well, put Trey White here at the 2. And you have your firm cement blocks, like you said, of like Kylan Boswell and KJ and Ben Hummerkaus. But this is so exciting for Brad Underwood to have all of these tools. And better yet, we can trust Brad by the end of the year that he's going to figure out a way to use these pieces. This isn't going to be a repeat of the Matthew Meyer year where there was just so much chaos and everything. This is a bunch of guys that actually want to be in Illinois for the right reasons. And if they don't produce, then guess what? There's going to be another guy on the bench that's going to be ready to produce for them.
Yeah, it was an identity crisis 2 years ago where Brad Underwood had navigated the portal well in the first few years anyway, getting a guy like Alfonso Plummer, for example. Like, that was not an afterthought. You knew that he was going to be a major contributor, but he helps you win a Big Ten title. Jacob Grandison was an early version, I think, of the transfer portal. Was he JUCO or I forget? But anyways, Brad's always been very malleable with this. I think 2 years ago, the concerns that I had as that season wore on, in hindsight, were just a matter of a coach figuring out, what do you do in a post-Kofi and Io era? Like, you had these signature players. You got your Big Ten tournament title. You got your Big Ten championship. You didn't have the March success, which I think added a lot of fuel to the fire with that disappointing season. And then you had this disastrous mix of too many freshmen and guys that, like a Matthew Meyer, he's not an alpha, but he was thrust into being an alpha player. I think even Terrence Shannon Jr. Terrence was good his junior year. He was good. He was really good at times, but there was a stretch there in like early February where I didn't see him on the. You didn't feel his presence all that much. He was fine. You know, he was not the Terrence Shannon that we saw last year. He made an incredible jump. So I think that now that you have a template, especially on offense, they went out and they got skill and skill plays. UConn won because they were skilled, and they were more skilled than anybody else in the nation. I don't know if Illinois is at that level, but they're at least in the conversation. If you were to say what teams have some of the highest ceilings out there, and now it comes down to, can you continue to hone that offensive philosophy that you developed last year? And now what excites me, Austin, is the fact that last year's offense, good as it was predicated on two guys consistently dropping 20-plus points. And if you remember, Quincy Guerrier disappeared for an extended stretch of that season. Coleman was really good throughout, but offensively, there'd be nights where he gave you 8 or 9, but he was doing so much else. Luke Goody gave you some late. Dane gave you a lot late in the season. But my point is, when it comes to skill, offensive skill, that team really had to get guys red hot at the right time, I think, to make that Elite Eight run. Because otherwise, it would have been just Terrence doing his thing. You just happen to match that with Luke playing his best, Dane playing his best, and Marcus Damask being Marcus Damask. This year, I think he just had more options. And I hope that offsets the loss of a truly kind of generational Illini and Terrence, because that's what I think he was. I've never seen a season like that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Terrence's season and who Terrence was as a player. I mean, I'm glad he's in the rafters with all the crap that he had to deal with. I am glad that all of this is kind of behind him and he can go to Minnesota and play his best in the NBA that he can. And but Brad Underwood is going to use this as recruiting for what Terrence Shannon did, and just the fact that there is a mold of booty ball that can be replicated by a guy like Ben Hummerkaus, like what Marcus Damask was able to do. I mean, that brings me a lot of optimism that this offense can still do its thing and morph around different things. So I am excited about what this offense can look like, even if it doesn't have Terrence Shannon. But speaking of recruiting, we lost Tim Anderson. He takes a leave of absence. What are your thoughts on the Illini staff without Tim Anderson on it?
Whatever. He was really good. I mean, but you got an alpha dog now in Orlando Antigua. You have your European connection with Jeff Alexander. They elevated somebody whose name escapes me. I forget, but if this is even 3 years ago, I'm freaking out. I mean, I remember distinctly after the 01 season when they lost to Loyola, and then in the course of a month, you lost Adam Miller, and you're thinking, what? Why? He started every game. And then you lost Orlando and Chin to Kentucky, and you lost Stephen Gentry to Gonzaga. And he overcame that. I say he, Brad, overcame that. For whatever reason, Tim is stepping away. That's his call, and it does sound like he is truly just stepping away from coaching this year. Like he's not going to coach anywhere, which I haven't really seen much of, and I haven't heard anything that sounds like, inappropriate or anything. It just seems like a guy that, whether it's burnout or he just didn't feel like his place was here anymore, that's totally his right. But it does not concern me about the program. And we see these two new recruits. And Austin, I'll be honest, I used to be so laser focused on recruiting because we need this guy. We need that guy. And then we wouldn't get those guys. And then you move on to the next one. You go down from Jalen Brunson.
Evans.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They're in the book. It's like Brunson, Evans. Oh God, where's Jaquan? Were we in on Jaquan Lyle? He was the reason. No, he's the reason you lost Quentin Snyder. So like this laundry list of misses that just crippled the program. And here we are. And these two guys that committed, Austin, I don't know if they're going to play a game for Illinois. That's just how it is. But I do know if they don't, it's because he went out and got somebody better. I mean, he was the guy that we had, brother plays at Michigan State. Fears.
Yes.
Ho-hum, he's gone. It's okay. We'll get Will Riley within a month.
Chase Butler, same thing.
Yeah, it's in my mind, it's such an embarrassment of riches. Where when we were on the radio at 93.5, every recruiting battle was just heightened. It was the end all be all. We need this to get things going again. And now it's just exacerbated by the NIL era, the transfer portal for sure. But no matter if it's high school recruiting or transfer portal recruiting, Igor Demine, oh my God, what are we going to do? Oh wait, 3 weeks later we get Kasparis.
Yes.
It's whatever.
Yeah, I mean, recruiting has definitely shifted with NIL, and Illinois has done a great job with Icon of keeping Illinois at the forefront of college basketball. I think they're ranked 10th in perceived value of what they bring to the table, according to CBS Sports. So recruiting is the last of my worries, which is just crazy that it used to be number one in everything that we talk about on 93.5. It was, let's go through the top 150. Oh, this assistant coach has a connection with this high school coach. Oh, man, let's laser in on that guy. And I mean, it's that those days are done, which is so refreshing for my own mental health and my own stress levels. But
yeah, it was a total drag for about a decade. And the only thing I can compare this to is if Bill Self had stayed, he would have been recruiting his butt off. I mean, we would have probably gotten a natty at some point. Charlie Villanueva would have been one of the early ones to come here. You go down the list, he would have gotten Sharon
I think he beat Sean May with Charlie Villanueva.
Would he have been playing? Did Charlie V play in 0405 and where? I forget where.
I think it was UConn, but I think
you're right. And if I recall, he came here and maybe the same year Tyler Hansborough came here, though he was a freshman the following year. But regardless, no, yeah, there might be something to that. I don't think that Brian Randall, for example, if he would have been healthy, I don't think that changes the outcome of the game.
No.
But overall, yeah, that's the last time I felt that like things were really cooking. And I even mentioned in the book that the 5-alarm fire when Bruce Weber was here after the Final Four was that your next recruiting class was Jamar Smith and Chester Frazier. And it's not throwing them under the bus because Chester ultimately by his senior year was a pretty good Big Ten point guard, a great defender. He was a guy you'd want on your team. He could have won a bunch of games at Purdue with the kind of talent that Matt Painter had there, right? He would have been a point guard there and done kind of like what Lewis Jackson did. And Jamar, if not for off the court issues, he was a diamond in the rough. So that's great evaluation. But that's not the recruiting class you bring in after going 37-2 and making the national title game. And that was a sign, right? And by the time we've messed out on Eric Gordon and Derrick Rose and blah, 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 game over, right? So here we are in this really fun, comfortable position because I don't think about it nearly as much. And I see this Will Riley on July 1st, and I was excited, but it didn't really affect my day because it was just one of yet another really good players he has coming in, which I now expect. That's a pretty good place to be in.
It is an amazing place to be in. So you mentioned your book, and let's get to it. You wrote the 200 level, and what was the inspiration for writing your book, and how did the book come to be, essentially?
So I teach by day. I'm a middle school English teacher, and summer break started in June. But about a week before that, I'm texting with a group of friends in a group chat that we have. And I'm sitting watching TV one night, just brainstorming. What am I going to do this summer, other than Dave's shows, which like that's 2 weekends there. But what am I going to do for the rest of the summer? And I'm like, I'm going to write a book. I don't know how. I was going to do it. Well, what am I going to write a book about? And then it's the old adage of write what you know. And I know Illinois sports. And then it was a question of, okay, but you got to narrow your focus. It can't just be me and Illinois sports by Mike Carpenter. Like, what's the angle? And I fairly quickly abandoned the idea of both the basketball and football thing because I don't know how many chapters I could have written about football in my life. And I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, which I've done before, but I could probably count on one hand the truly enjoyable football seasons. That's just a fact, right? But with basketball, in hindsight, other than a pretty rough decade there with John Gross, let's say late Weber, Gross, early Underwood. Other than that, this basketball program has been very kind to me and given me and my family and my friends a ton of memories. So I kind of approach this as like a nostalgia IV drip. It's like, okay, I'm going to go back. I'll focus on some individual seasons. The very first thing I wrote was about 2001, Bill Self's first year, which was a very formative year for me as a fan because it was the first time I experienced Illinois basketball being great. Not just good, but great and on the doorstep of the Final Four. And then I worked my way back from Henson in the 90s because I do not write about the Flying Illini. I was too young, all the way up to 2024. And try to incorporate not just what happened on the court, but where was I watching it? Who was I watching it with? What was my lucky jersey? What was my pregame meal? What was the crowd like at Legends when we were watching this game against Arizona in December when Lucas Johnson got into a tussle with Lute Olson? Like all these memories that I've basically been writing this book for my entire life through telling these stories to friends and to Lon and to you and Jeremy and anybody else. Well, now let's write about it. So that's what I did.
Whenever you went through your memory banks, which is just you have an insane memory of where you were and all that, and placing yourself. What was the biggest pain you felt watching an Illini sporting event that was not the national championship game?
And I wrote about that, which while it was painful, it was a dull ache. And I knew that morning, Austin, as much as one can know. I woke up that morning not saying we're going to win a national title. I woke up that morning saying, I don't feel it. I write about gut feelings a lot in this, and that was one that actually bore out. I did not feel that entire day like we were going to win it. So it hurt less. And I was not feeling that way to just put on the proverbial cup. I genuinely didn't feel it from the moment I woke up. So to me, the most painful, boy, there's been a few. Arizona Elite Eight 2001. That game just stunk. We were at Legends watching it. 37 fouls called against Illinois. 5 players foul out. Corey Bradford gives a valiant effort, keeps you in the game despite Frank really struggling. Arizona was loaded. They got all the calls in that game. You lost by 6. I mean, you were still in the damn thing. That was painful. The Loyola game was like the most bizarre game-watching experience of my life, truly. It's like the game never happened. It started, it ended, and if you ask me to think of one memorable Illini play, I can't. I genuinely can't. It's like a weird fever dream of 2 hours where it's just random images of Sister Jean courtside and Cameron Crutwig's mustache, which is far less attractive than yours. And
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you actually wore it well. He didn't. So that, and then I will point out one random one, which came out the year before that. Illinois, Michigan State at State Farm Center. And who was the big guy that got... Okay, so Illinois comes back from 23 down, something like that. And this is 3 days after they lost at home to Maryland. Like, it was our arrival moment. We blew it against Maryland. But, oh, my God, Kofi makes 2 free throws. We're leading Michigan State. One of the most amazing comebacks. It would have topped Seton Hall back in 2000. Michigan State goes down the court, and their big, whose name escapes me, gets a dunk because I think Alan Griffin didn't box out. Okay, Illinois still has a chance to go back down. They're down 1. Who has the ball? Io. What does Io do? He trips on a wet spot on the floor. We think his knee exploded. Season over. I remember that night and the next day at school until we got the news that Io had no structural damage. I remember that being one of the longest 24-hour periods of my life. And it was a regular season game. I mean, it stunk.
Yeah, that day was pretty unreal for me. So I was sick as a dog producing the Jeremy Warner show. And Jake Hassan had to talk for me the entire episode because I had the flu. And this doctor comes up and asks me, "Hey, have you ever been to China?" And I was like, "That's a weird question." I don't know. Like, no, I've never been to China, but I have the flu, and then March happens, and this thing called COVID takes over. So it did feel weird, that kind of stretch run of Illinois basketball, because that next year, it felt like there was no celebration. And Joe Madden always talked about that with the 2017 or 2018 Cubs. I couldn't remember exactly, where there was no celebration. It was, you got the number one seed while you're kind of still sweating off the Big Ten tournament championship, and then boom, you're right into the number 16 game, and then you play early Sunday morning for that Loyola game. It just felt like it was all happening way too fast, and Illinois just wasn't able to keep the endurance of that incredible celebration going, because they never truly ended the celebration until it abruptly ended in Loyola.
That's a great point. So you mentioned this and why some seasons are more memorable than others. And okay, the year that COVID interrupted the tournament, that was a bummer. However, our last moment, and I was lucky enough to go to the State Farm Center with my dad for this, and we're all starting to feel a little bit antsy. Like, do we shake? Like, I remember, I think Hans D came up to say hi. And I was like, do I shake his hand or not? I know this thing, it's like in Seattle now.
I'll go yet.
Yeah, right. Like, what do you do? No one's wearing masks. No one really cares. It was like the most full-throated crowd, and we beat Iowa, which secured us a top 4 spot in the Big Ten tournament. But that game, while it didn't win you a Big Ten title, it was such a cathartic moment, because that Brad Underwood team didn't win really a signature home game that year. They beat Indiana a week or two before, but they had lost what would have been the 2 signature ones against Maryland and Michigan State. So that was a cathartic celebratory moment. And even though it ended with COVID, that season still ended with a shine, right? Go back to this year. I didn't mention UConn as one of the more disappointing losses, and I probably should have, because they went on a freaking 30-0 run, good as they were. But that win against Iowa State, okay, the whole month of March, if I'm being honest, Big Ten tournament title, and then the win against Iowa State and the way you did it, and the Terrence Dunk, which is probably up there with Darren Williams 3 is my favorite individual Illini play. Like, that's it. I've never exploded that much at one play, I don't think. And because of that, it made the UConn game hurt a lot less, where I woke up the next morning and thought, oh, that was a bummer. But that was a hell of a season. So it is true what Joe Madden said, however he said it, that if you get that celebratory moment, it does let that season register higher than others. And to 2022 or 2021, you did win the Big Ten tournament title, but you mentioned it. It was such a weird experience to, like, 5 minutes later, oh, you're a 1 seed. Well, yeah, I knew that, but can I get some post game? Like, don't go to the bracket show yet. I want to soak this in. Didn't get a chance, and then it was over less than a week later, and that was a very empty feeling.
I was really concerned with this NCAA tournament, this past one, because again, we were in the same situation. We won the Big Ten tournament. Nets are being cut down and everything, and I'm like, oh no, we're going to be tired out for this NCAA tournament, and I was really concerned about that. And luckily the bracket broke a little bit early on. Like, Illinois secured some breaks on who they had to play, but it was very. It was like, am I living deja vu right now? Like, it felt a little bit like that, but then you realize, oh, you actually have a dog in Terrence Shannon that can score from anywhere. He can drive to the lane. Like, it wasn't like Io, where there was more of a distribution game that Io DeSumo had, where he couldn't just take over a game like Terrence Shannon could. And Terrence, my goodness, that will go down as one of the biggest tournament runs by an individual Illini that we will ever see.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that Iowa's legacy, and I remember Jeremy saying this after the fact. I did a podcast with him like a day or two after the Loyola loss, because this is still, well, no, we would have been back in school from COVID, but I think it was spring break or something.
Everyone had availability for podcasts.
Oh, yeah, all the time. We did, yeah, absolutely. So I remember he made a good point. He was like, Io, it could turn out he's kind of like Eddie Johnson. He's the first. And there's always something about the first, right? They will always have that place. But if this program is done right, there will be better. He deserves to have his jersey up there. Would he consider the circumstantial things around Illinois basketball. When he committed to when he left, that was the jump of the program. But under that new sort of with that higher floor that you now have, you can just go out there and get dude after dude after dude. But to Terrence's credit, I mean, we're going to get other dudes. I think Asparis is going to be a dude from the jump, but they aren't going to be that dominant. We may win it when we win a national title. If that, I say when, if, but I do hope when. I don't think there's going to be a player on that team as dominant as Terrence Shannon Jr. It's hard to picture that, you know, and yeah. I just think that speaks to when that tournament, when the brackets came out, Austin, I wasn't all that worried about it. Even if BYU had beaten Duquesne, I felt like that was a favorable matchup, unless they hit like 23s. And it just seemed like at the end of the day, we could have a really simple equation. You have that dude, the other team does not. Therefore, you're probably going to win. And it was just the juggernaut that was UConn that stopped you. And I can live with that. If you're in another bracket, you're probably in the Final Four. But I can't complain overall about the draw, because when you get an 11 seed in the second round, and I think the easiest 2 seed in the Sweet 16, I think it broke okay for Illinois.
Yeah, having would you rather lose in the championship to UConn or the Elite Eight? I think the Elite Eight, in all honesty, like, because I'm sure Purdue is like, wow, we got all the way to almost there and didn't break through. Like that North Carolina game, it probably is a very similar feeling to what Purdue fans are feeling, but only in a way that it's like we're never even close, I guess, even as close as we got.
I'll take the national title loss because it's for this simple reason. You raise a banner for a Final Four. So, for example, back in 2005, when they beat Arizona the way that they did, I mean, still, that game itself is like 8 pages in this thing. It was so cathartic because in my life, I only had VHS tapes of the 89 Flying Illini. And then most of my existence as a fan was they flamed out early. Lou Henson, after that, didn't get past the second round. Lon Kruger never got past the second round. Bill Self, tantalizingly close, and kind of built the foundation for what Weber did his first few years. But just by getting a Final Four banner, you solidify it as an all-time team. And the cool thing is, you can look at other programs like Michigan State. You know, they got 2 national titles. And I could sense when I went up there to Breslin Center that they are just a lot more low-key because of it. They're just chill because they got 2 national titles. I mean, it will last a lifetime, but they still look at some of those Final Four teams with almost as much affection. And Final Four, I mean, it's a rare sport where even if you don't win a title, if you get within the Final Four of college basketball, you are remembered as a great team. So I'll take that. I'll take a 30-0 run by UConn in the national title game, and I'll take that Final Four banner, you know, but I hope that's a problem we get to talk about soon. It does seem like we're in a position now where we can consistently maybe make second weekends if the brackets shake right. And then when you get that opportunity, it really just depends on how the seedings fall and who you end up facing and who's playing well at the right time. And I think we're going to get enough bites of the apple where eventually it happens, and maybe sooner rather than later.
So, Carp, what was it like in the writing process? What did you take away from writing a book?
That if you write what you know, it kind of writes itself in some ways. And the hardest part is making sure that narratively it makes sense. To me, the first thing I had to figure out was structure. Like, is it just going to be every single season? Is it going to be just completely chronological? Then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened. And then I had to figure out how episodic was this going to be? Like, how much of a balance am I going to strike between the games themselves and my emotions and experiences as a fan? Because my goal, Austin, is that when people read this, they are thinking, oh, God, that game. Oh, that's right. We were at that guy's garage watching it on his antenna, his TV with the antenna where he had to hit the top of it, top of the TV screen whenever the signal was crap. And his fridge was full of Milwaukee's best, or just all these little details that I think sports and music share 2 similar things. They elicit these very strong sensory memories, sports and music to me, sports and concerts. And I thought that the most difficult part was doing it in a way that was both personal but not self-serving. I wanted it to get just up to the personal level where it's like, okay, now reader, it's your turn to you reminisce. You think about it. I've given you my spiel. Now let's get on to the game itself so you can get back to where you were at in that moment. So that was the trickiest thing, I think, in writing it, was that balance.
Right. I mean, I hate comparing Illinois basketball to like 9/11, but like you mentioned 9/11, people know exactly where they were, and they will want to tell you their story about where they were during 9/11.
Yeah.
Where with Illini basketball and a lot, like it was such guttural reactions of Illini basketball fandom, like people want to tell where they were at. Like I did the same thing to you when you mentioned that Michigan State game. I remember it's like, yep, I was in bed with the flu. Like that's the kind of emotion that you want to elicit whenever you're talking about things that other people are passionate about and everything. And I can't wait to read this book. I can't wait to reminisce myself with you as the narrator through that process. And I am excited to get my hands on this book. So where can people find the book, Carp?
So if they're local in Champaign, it will be available next Thursday, October 3rd at Game Day Spirit, both locations, Jane Addams Bookshop in downtown Champaign, and the Lit Bookstore in downtown Champaign. So I would encourage anyone in Champaign-Urbana, shop local. I appreciate these retailers being willing to carry it, and I would direct Champaign-Urbana people there first. And if you are not in the area or can't get to the area to buy it, there's also one in Paxton, Austin.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
got copies. There's a new sporting goods store or sporting memorabilia shop up there called Game Changers in downtown Paxton. And they bought some copies. So people could go up to Paxton, get some just hamburgers, pop on over to Game Changers, buy a hardcover copy of the book. It's up there too. And then Amazon. And it will be available in all formats, hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook through Amazon on October 3rd.
Are you narrating the audiobook?
I did, yeah. And here's the great thing about that. So the two hardest things were balancing the personal and the games themselves, right? And making sure I struck a good balance there. And then the editing process, which I have always enjoyed editing my own work. I'm very picky about. I use that word twice in 4 pages. That can't. We got to get a different one, right? And by doing the audiobook, that's right. Use thesource.com, man. I tell my kids that. I still use it, thesource.com. And I did the audiobook, and I had the manuscript open in front of me, of course, while doing it. And if something didn't sound right, and you pick out a lot of things when you read your own work out loud, if something didn't sound right, pause. Okay, go back, type in, okay, rejigger this, change that word. Okay, do it again. And I noticed that by reading it and doing the audiobook, that was the final kind of sweep through it with editing that made sure that it was where I wanted it to be.
What did your kids think of you being an author and you having your own book?
This is great timing that you asked that. So today was Library Day, and I gave a copy to the Jefferson Library. And our librarian, she cataloged it, and she got it the little thing on the spine that has the Dewey Decimal System and CAR for my name. So I see it. I'm like, what a treat. I get a picture with it, and then we go for Library Day today. And I was not going to say – the kids knew I wrote a book. But I didn't want to say anything to them about, hey, my book's in the library. So she had stashed it up in the sports section. And I see kids going in there. It's like, oh, they're getting warmer. And one of my students comes out like, Mr. Carpenter, and then checks the book out. And I said, Ava, you are the first ever person to check out my book from a library. So you will be an Illini basketball expert within the week. So that was a cool treat to see one of my students. It's funny. She'll open it up and be like, Deion Thomas, TJ Wheeler. What? Okay. She'll look at the pictures and be like, all right, that's cute, Mr. Carpenter. Well done. And then, check it back in soon. But no, that was a trip, man. Like, because I'm in year 7 teaching, and I moved to 8th grade this year. So I'm working with a couple years older than I'm used to. And I just approached the librarian and said, is it cool if I give you a copy? She's like, are you kidding me? So that was to see someone like grab it and then go up and check it out. And they got the little card that says, this is when it's due. And I'm like, oh my God, it was cool. It was really cool.
Kids, do not lie on this book report because you have the author literally as your teacher. So you can't say you just read the story. So
you can't lie. And it has, no lying and only glowing reviews. That's the deal. And if it's not a glowing review, I don't want to hear about it. No, but yeah, I just hope that I felt like it was also a case of striking while the iron was hot. I think we all feel good about Illinois basketball right now. I'm not writing this book 10 years ago. Like, because even then, when
I
things
think
were
people would
good,
rather read an Edgar Allan Poe book.
yes, exactly, yes, something with existential dread, please. But even when things weren't good, you don't necessarily want to always reminisce on when things were good. It almost in a weird way makes it more depressing because you know what it was, but it's not now, and that's not the case anymore. It's like, wait, we are kind of riding this new wave that I haven't felt in quite a while, and it seems sustainable. So let's talk about, hey, we've got a good program, and it's in that way, it's a very celebratory book, even with the passages that cover the lean years. Hey, every story needs a conflict, and I felt like we kind of had that in the 2010s, and now the climax and the resolution of this story is far more positive than anything I could have written 10 years ago.
I mean, that's why the Cubs World Series in 2016 was that much sweeter because of the trials in 08, 09, 03, and go back to the 80s for the older Cubs fans. I mean, if you don't appreciate what you have, you got to look back on the dread to appreciate what you have in that particular moment and celebrate it even further. So I do agree with your assessment that you got to take some of the negative in that and what you're dealing with in the positive in the present tense. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's listen. I know that you mentioned earlier in the podcast we used to get grief for when we be critical, and there have been times where I allowed emotion to get within that criticism, and that's just being a fan. And I try to be honest in my appraisal of myself with that. Like, I can do better. At 37, I can still do better, but it is so much more fun to just talk about the good stuff. And you got to call out the things when you see them. And there's probably going to be a bad loss or two with football this year where we're like, God darn it. And no matter what a record is, we should be able to talk about the things that didn't work. But in the aggregate, the macro sense of where these programs are at, life is good. And being a lifelong resident of Champaign-Urbana, when those teams are good, this whole community feels it. And it's just really cool to see people so genuinely excited about Illini sports. And these might be the golden years. I mean, the 80s belong to the Illini, and that my dad talks about it fondly, but I feel like 20, 30 years from now, we might be doing the same about this era. And the cool thing, Austin, is I feel like in some ways we are at the beginning for both basketball and football of what could be an extended stretch of some pretty exciting seasons.
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with you, especially on the basketball side of things where you lost Kofi, you lost Io, and you haven't missed a beat. Other years of the Illini, it would be, well, you lost Kendall Gill. Now we're going to take a downturn for a little bit. Like, that's the kind of mantra that Illinois fans have dealt with, and now it's just consistency and consistency and consistency, and that's what great leadership like Josh Whitman has presented for the Illini. Carp, I want to thank you so much for joining Illini Cast, part of the Armchair Illini Network, and once again, Amazon for those out of towners that they can grab the 200 level.
Yeah, so beginning on October 3rd. So Amazon, and I try to set it up. Here's the full title: The 200 Level, an Illinois Fighting Illini Basketball Fans Journey. Why the extended title? Search engine optimization. So my hope, Austin, is they type in Illini book, and then beginning October 3rd, they can find it. But it is called The 200 Level. Amazon for anyone that's not in Champaign-Urbana. And, hardcover, paperback, Kindle, audiobook, got them all.
Well, I appreciate it once again. Thank you, Carp, and I hope you have a great rest of your night, and best of luck with the book sales, and I can't wait to see a lot of Illini fans read that, especially at Jefferson Middle School. Thank you once again, Carp.
Thanks, Austin. Anytime, man. I appreciate it.